Sophia, Mom is home.
Hello, Elena.
Oh my God, look at you. You've grown so much.
Military mom returns after 5 years. Her teenage daughter's response will make you cry. The military transport bus wheezed to a stop outside Fort Campbell as Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez clutched her discharge papers with hands that still trembled from 5 years of combat stress. Her daughter Sophia would be 17 now, no longer the 12-year-old who'd cried at the airport when Mommy left for just one deployment that stretched into half a decade of classified missions. Elena's grandmother Rosa had sent exactly 3 photos during those years, each one showing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. What Elena didn't know was that Sophia had spent 847 days planning this moment, rehearsing conversations that might bridge the gap between the mother who'd left and the warrior who'd returned. The teenager waiting in Rosa's kitchen had built walls higher than any military base, fortified with resentment that had aged into something resembling forgiveness, but forgiveness earned through blood, not given through biology. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in living rooms, not war zones. Fort Campbell, Kentucky, served as the gateway between Elena's military identity and the civilian family she'd abandoned for duty that had demanded everything and given back nightmares. The base housing she'd left behind had been sold, the furniture donated, the life she'd built with her late husband Miguel scattered like ashes across 5 years of deployment extensions that had transformed necessary service into voluntary exile from motherhood. Elena Rodriguez had enlisted after Miguel's death in Iraq, driven by grief that demanded purpose and patriotism that required sacrifice. Her specialty in military intelligence had made her valuable to operations that couldn't be discussed, missions that had taken her through Afghanistan, Somalia, and classified locations where American interests required protection by people willing to disappear for years at a time. At 38, Elena carried herself with the controlled precision of someone who'd learned that hesitation meant death and doubt was luxury that warriors couldn't afford. Her body bore scars from shrapnel and training accidents, while her mind carried memories that would never translate to civilian conversation. The transition from Master Sergeant to unemployed single mother represented an identity crisis that terrified her more than enemy fire ever had. Sophia Rodriguez had transformed from abandoned child into self-sufficient teenager through necessity rather than choice. At 17, she possessed the kind of independence that came from raising herself while adults fought wars half a world away. Her relationship with Abuela Rosa was warm but complicated. The elderly woman had provided stability and love, but couldn't replace the mother who'd chosen duty over daughter. The girl who'd once worshipped her mother's uniform had learned to resent everything it represented. Military wives who'd promised to check in had disappeared after the first year. Care packages from Elena's unit had arrived sporadically, filled with apologies and explanations that felt increasingly hollow as birthdays passed unacknowledged and milestones went uncelebrated. Sophia's academic excellence was both achievement and weapon straight A's. That proved she didn't need anyone college acceptance letters that mapped escape routes from a family that had never quite functioned. Her plans for Columbia University represented more than education. They symbolized freedom from military life that had taken her father's life and her mother's attention. Rosa Martinez had become the family's anchor through sheer determination and cultural obligation that made abandoning family impossible, even when family abandoned each other. At 73, she'd raised her own children, buried her husband, and accepted responsibility for a granddaughter whose parents had chosen military service over parental presence. Rosa's small house in Clarksville had become headquarters for a war effort focused on keeping Sophia stable while Elena fought different battles overseas. The elderly woman's wisdom extended beyond childcare to understanding that healing required patience, forgiveness demanded time, and some wounds could only heal when people chose love over pride. The community surrounding Fort Campbell was accustomed to deployment cycles that strained families and fractured relationships. But Elena's case was extreme even by military standards. 5 years represented an entire adolescent development period, transforming the family dynamics from mother-daughter to strangers, sharing DNA and complicated history. The economic reality was equally challenging. Elena's military pay had supported Rosa's household and Sophia's needs, but civilian employment with her skill set was limited to security contractors willing to deploy overseas again, exactly what she'd returned home to avoid. The choice between financial stability and family presence had defined her entire adult life, and civilian transition hadn't eliminated the contradiction. The psychological complexity was staggering for everyone involved. Elena's combat stress competed with maternal guilt, while Sophia's abandonment issues conflicted with love for a mother she barely remembered. Rosa's caretaker fatigue was balanced against her cultural commitment to family unity that had sustained 3 generations of military wives and children. The taxi ride from Fort Campbell to Rosa's house stretched 23 minutes that felt like a lifetime of reckoning. Elena watched familiar landscapes transformed by 5 years of development, new shopping centers, where cow pastures had been subdivisions replacing tobacco fields, progress that reminded her how much life had continued without her participation. Her civilian clothes felt foreign after years of uniforms, while her duffel bag contained everything she owned, photographs from deployments, medals she'd never display, and gifts for a daughter who might not want them. The tactical gear that had kept her alive overseas seemed pointless in suburban Kentucky, where the greatest threats were emotional rather than ballistic. Rosa's house materialized from memory, with shocking accuracy, the same faded blue paint, the same chain-link fence, the same porch swing where Elena had once rocked infant Sophia during sleepless nights after Miguel's funeral. But the flower garden was different, clearly tended by teenage hands that had learned patience and nurturing during Elena's absence. The front door opened before Elena could knock, revealing Rosa's face marked by 5 additional years of worry, but illuminated by genuine joy at her granddaughter's return. The embrace was fierce and forgiving, carrying maternal love that had sustained Elena through nightmares and Rosa through the daily challenges of single-handedly raising a traumatized adolescent. "Mija," Rosa whispered, "she's been waiting for you to come home. She won't admit it, but she checks the calendar every day, counting." The warning in Rosa's voice was gentle, but clear. Sophia's emotional armor had been years in construction and wouldn't be easily dismantled by maternal presence or military discipline. The girl who'd once idolized her mother had learned to protect herself from disappointment by expecting nothing and demanding proof of every promise. Sophia's appearance from the kitchen was carefully staged, her timing, suggesting she'd been monitoring the conversation while building courage for confrontation she'd rehearsed countless times. At 17, she'd inherited Elena's height and Miguel's dark eyes, but her expression carried wariness that belonged entirely to her own experience of abandonment and survival. "Hello, Elena," Sophia said formally, using her mother's first name with precision that felt like a weapon. "Rosa said you'd be staying with us temporarily while you figure out your next deployment." The words were chosen for maximum impact, acknowledging Elena's presence while questioning her commitment to staying. The teenager's posture was defensive, but controlled, suggesting someone who'd learned to manage conflict through emotional distance rather than confrontation. Elena's response was complicated by competing instincts, maternal authority that demanded respect, military training that recognized strategic retreat, and guilt that urged immediate submission to any accusation Sophia might level. The moment balanced on psychological knife's edge that could determine whether reconciliation was possible or family fractured permanently. "Sophia," Elena began carefully, "I know we have a lot to talk about. I know I've missed too much time, made too many mistakes. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again." The promise was both necessary and dangerous, creating expectation that Elena wasn't certain she could fulfill. Her PTSD symptoms were manageable but unpredictable. Her job prospects were limited, and her understanding of civilian parenting was theoretical rather than practical. Sophia's response was immediate and cutting. "You promised that before. You promised Dad you'd take care of me, promised me you'd only be gone for one deployment, promised Rosa you'd send money every month. Your promises don't mean much around here." The accusation was factually accurate and emotionally devastating, stripping away Elena's military achievements to reveal the fundamental failure that had defined her daughter's adolescence. Each broken promise had accumulated into a debt that couldn't be repaid through apologies or good intentions. Rosa's intervention was gentle but firm. "Sophia, your mother is home now. We can work through the hurt, but we have to start somewhere." The opening gambit had been played by all three women, establishing positions that would define the negotiation ahead. Elena needed forgiveness she hadn't earned. Sophia demanded accountability she'd never received, and Rosa sought peace that required both women to choose family over pride. The first week of cohabitation revealed the depth of disconnection between mother and daughter as daily routines exposed 5 years of parallel evolution that had created strangers sharing space rather than family sharing love. Elena's military schedule, her 0500 wake-up structured meals, lights out at 2200, collided with Sophia's teenage autonomy, developed through years of self-management that Rosa had encouraged out of necessity rather than choice. Elena's attempts at maternal authority were met with polite resistance that proved more devastating than open rebellion. When she suggested family dinners, Sophia complied with the mechanical precision of someone following orders rather than sharing connection. When Elena offered help with homework, Sophia produced perfect grades that made assistance unnecessary, while highlighting how much academic achievement had occurred without maternal support. The psychological warfare was subtle but comprehensive. Sophia's bedroom walls displayed photographs from 5 years of birthdays, graduations, and holidays celebrations that had occurred without Elena's presence, creating visual evidence of abandonment that needed no explanation. Her college acceptance letters were posted prominently, mapping escape routes from family obligations that had proven unreliable. Elena's job search became daily reminder of skills that didn't translate to civilian employment and experience that scared potential employers rather than impressing them. Security firms offered overseas contracts that would recreate the separation she'd returned to avoid, while local positions paid wages that couldn't support Rosa's household or Sophia's college expenses. The escalation began when Elena discovered Sophia's part-time job at a local veterinary clinic responsibility the teenager had assumed to reduce financial pressure on Rosa, while building independence that military dependents rarely experienced. Instead of pride, Elena felt guilt that her daughter had been forced into premature adulthood by maternal absence that had prioritized abstract duty over concrete need. "Why didn't anyone tell me you were working?" Elena asked Rosa during a private conversation that revealed how much communication had broken down during deployment years. Rosa's response was careful but honest. "Mija, we stopped telling you things because you stopped being able to help with them. Sophia needed money for school clothes, not another apology letter from Afghanistan." The truth was brutal but necessary. Elena's deployment had transformed her from active parent to distant observer, reducing her role in Sophia's life to financial support and occasional phone calls that became increasingly strained as time zones and operational security complicated connection. The crisis deepened when Elena attended a parent-teacher conference that revealed how completely she'd been replaced in official records and practical reality. Sophia's emergency contacts listed Rosa as primary and Elena as deployed military parent contact via Red Cross if necessary. Teachers who'd worked with Sophia for years had never met her mother, creating academic relationships that had developed without maternal input or oversight. Mrs. Rodriguez has been Sophia's effective guardian for several years. The guidance counselor explained with diplomatic precision, "We understand that military service requires sacrifice, but Sophia has needed consistency in her support system." The institutional judgment was delivered with professional courtesy that couldn't disguise underlying criticism of Elena's choices. School records documented 5 years of achievements, challenges, and growth that had occurred without maternal participation, creating educational history that highlighted Elena's absence rather than celebrating her service. Sophia's social relationships reflected similar adaptation to single-parent reality managed by Rosa rather than Elena. Her friends' parents knew Rosa as Sophia's grandmother, who raised her while her mom was in the Army, creating social identity that positioned Elena as historical figure rather than active family member. The most devastating revelation came when Elena discovered Sophia's therapy records, 3 years of counseling to address abandonment, anxiety, depression, and identity issues related to having parents who'd chosen military service over family presence. The psychological intervention had been necessary and successful, but it documented damage that Elena's absence had inflicted on her daughter's emotional development. Elena's own therapeutic needs became apparent as civilian transition triggered PTSD symptoms that had been manageable during structured military deployment, but became overwhelming in domestic environment where she lacked clear mission or defined role. Nightmares that had been routine nuisance in combat zones became family disruption that affected everyone's sleep and emotional stability. The breaking point arrived when Sophia announced her intention to spend the summer before college working at a camp in Colorado, rather than remaining home to get reacquainted with a mother she'd learned to live without. The decision was practical and emotionally protective, but it represented final rejection of Elena's hopes for family reconciliation before Sophia's departure for university. "I've made plans that don't include you," Sophia explained with devastating honesty. "I've learned not to count on things that might not happen." The statement crystallized 5 years of broken promises and missed opportunities into present reality that demanded Elena's acceptance of consequences she'd created through choices that had seemed noble at the time, but had proven destructive to the relationship she'd intended to protect through service. Rosa's mediation became crucial as both women approached emotional points of no return that would either force breakthrough or create permanent fracture. Her intervention was rooted in cultural wisdom that understood healing required patience, accountability demanded humility, and some bridges could only be rebuilt through daily acts of love rather than dramatic gestures of redemption. V Major Crisis and Dark Moment, 800 words. The crisis exploded on a Thursday morning when Elena discovered Sophia researching emancipation laws, preparing to legally sever their family relationship before turning 18. The laptop screen displayed detailed information about minor independence procedures, suggesting that Sophia viewed legal separation as preferable to emotional reconciliation with a mother who'd chosen military service over maternal presence. Elena's confrontation was immediate and emotionally devastating. "Are you seriously planning to divorce your own mother?" Sophia's response was delivered with calm precision that proved more hurtful than screaming, "You divorced me 5 years ago when you chose to keep extending deployments instead of coming home. I'm just making it official." The accusation was factually accurate and morally complex. Elena's deployment extensions had been voluntary after the first year, driven by unit needs and mission requirements that had seemed more important than domestic obligations. Each extension had been justified by operational necessity and financial benefits, but the cumulative effect had transformed temporary separation into permanent abandonment. Rosa's intervention revealed the depth of family fracture that went beyond mother-daughter conflict to encompass 3 generations of women damaged by military service demands and cultural expectations about sacrifice and duty. Her own marriage had survived multiple deployments, but at costs that she'd never discussed with Elena until this moment of crisis. "Mija," Rosa told Elena with painful honesty, "you made the same mistake your father made, the same mistake Miguel made. You thought serving your country was more important than serving your family. Maybe that's noble, but it's also selfish." The generational perspective was devastating because it revealed patterns of choice rather than unavoidable circumstances. Elena's deployment extensions had been decisions rather than orders, preferences rather than requirements, career advancement rather than family necessity. Elena's PTSD symptoms intensified under emotional pressure, triggering flashbacks and anxiety attacks that made rational conversation impossible while providing Sophia with additional evidence that her mother was too damaged for normal family relationships. The combat stress that Elena had managed professionally became domestic liability that affected everyone's quality of life. The darkest moment came when Elena discovered Sophia's college scholarship applications, which described growing up effectively orphaned by military service and raised by grandmother due to parental deployment. The essays were honest, well-written, and successful. They'd earned substantial financial aid, but they portrayed Elena as absent figure rather than sacrificing parent. "Is this really how you see our family?" Elena asked, reading words that reduced 5 years of dangerous service to selfish abandonment. Sophia's response was immediate and unforgiving. "It's not how I see it, it's what actually happened. You weren't here for my first period, my first heartbreak, my first car accident, my SATs, my senior prom planning. Rosa was here. You were somewhere classified doing something you can't talk about with people whose names you can't tell me." The litany of missed milestones was comprehensive and unanswerable. Elena's classified missions had indeed taken her to places she couldn't discuss with people she couldn't name, doing work that had protected American interests but failed to protect her daughter's emotional needs. Elena's attempts to explain the importance of her military service were met with Sophia's devastating counter-argument. Other military parents managed to stay connected to their kids. Other moms find ways to balance service and family. You chose not to. The comparison to other military families was particularly painful because it was accurate. Elena's unit had included parents who'd maintained active relationships with their children through video calls, care packages, and strategic leave planning. Her own isolation from family had been choice rather than necessity, driven by guilt over Miguel's death and belief that dangerous service was appropriate penance for survivor's syndrome. The psychological evaluation required for Elena's veterans benefits revealed the depth of her combat stress and the extent to which military identity had replaced maternal identity during deployment years. The therapist's assessment was clinical but damning. Elena had used military service to avoid processing grief over her husband's death and guilt over her perceived failure as a mother. "You can't serve your way out of trauma," the counselor explained. "You've been running from your feelings about Miguel's death by staying deployed, but that running has created new trauma for your daughter." The professional diagnosis was devastating because it revealed Elena's military service as psychological escape rather than patriotic duty, making her deployment extensions selfish rather than sacrificial. The hero narrative she'd constructed around her service collapsed when viewed through the lens of family abandonment and emotional avoidance. Rosa's ultimatum was delivered with grandmother's authority that transcended military rank or maternal privilege. "Elena, you have until Sophia leaves for college to prove you want to be her mother. After that, I won't enable your guilt or her anger. This family needs healing, not more hurt." The transformation began when Elena made the most difficult decision of her military career. She declined a lucrative defense contractor position overseas and instead accepted work at the local VA hospital, choosing proximity to family over professional advancement for the first time since Miguel's death. The job paid less and offered fewer opportunities, but it kept her within driving distance of Rosa's house and Sophia's remaining months before college. Elena's next step was radical and unprecedented. She voluntarily entered intensive family therapy with Sophia and Rosa, agreeing to civilian psychological treatment that military culture typically viewed as weakness. The sessions were brutal and cathartic, forcing all three women to confront truths they'd avoided for years. Elena, the family therapist Dr. Patricia Vargas observed during their third session, "You've been treating your family like a military unit where deployment is normal and separation is acceptable. But families need presence, not just support. Your daughter needed a mother, not a military provider. The professional perspective was devastating but necessary. Elena's approach to motherhood had been influenced by military mindset that valued mission completion over relationship maintenance, creating parenting style that prioritized duty over connection. Elena's breakthrough came when she stopped defending her service record and started acknowledging her failures as a mother. The shift from justification to accountability created space for conversation rather than argument, allowing Sophia to express hurt without triggering Elena's defensive responses. Sophia, Elena said during a session that would define their future relationship, "I was wrong. I thought I was serving you by serving my country, but I was really serving my own need to avoid dealing with your father's death and my fear of failing you. I failed you anyway, but in a worse way, by not being here." The admission was complete and unconditional, requiring Elena to abandon the hero narrative she'd constructed around her service while accepting responsibility for choices that had damaged her daughter's emotional development. The moment marked Elena's transition from military leader to accountable parent. Sophia's response was cautious but significant. "I don't need you to have been perfect. I needed you to have been present. I still don't know if I can trust you not to leave again when things get difficult." The conditional acceptance was more than Elena had dared hope for, but it came with requirements that would test her commitment to family over military identity. Sophia demanded proof rather than promises, accountability rather than apologies, and presence rather than explanations. The practical reconciliation began with small gestures that accumulated into meaningful change. Elena attended Sophia's final track meet, learned her daughter's favorite music, and took interest in college plans that represented Sophia's independence rather than threatening Elena's control. Each interaction was negotiated rather than assumed, building trust through demonstrated reliability. Rosa's role evolved from family manager to healing facilitator as Elena gradually assumed maternal responsibilities she'd abandoned years earlier. The transition was complicated by Sophia's established autonomy and Elena's lack of experience with teenage parenting, but progress occurred through patience rather than authority. The major test came when Sophia's prom date canceled at the last minute, creating emotional crisis that required immediate parental response. Elena's impulse was to solve the problem through military efficiency, call the boy's parents, demand explanation, arrange alternative dates. Instead, she simply held her crying daughter and listened to disappointment without trying to fix it immediately. Sometimes, being a mom means just being present for the hurt. Elena learned through experience that no amount of military training had provided. The prom crisis became turning point when Elena spent the entire day helping Sophia prepare for an event she'd ultimately attend with friends rather than a date. The hairstyling, makeup application, and photograph session weren't dramatic gestures, they were mundane maternal activities that created connection through shared focus on Sophia's happiness. The graduation ceremony represented culmination of reconciliation process that had transformed their relationship from broken to functional, if not yet fully healed. Elena sat beside Rosa in the family section, watching Sophia receive academic honors that had been earned without maternal support, but could be celebrated with maternal presence. Sophia's valedictory speech included subtle acknowledgement of family complexity. We've learned that families aren't defined by who's present for every moment, but by who chooses to show up when presence matters most. Growing up, military taught me that love takes many forms, including the courage to admit mistakes and the strength to rebuild what's been broken. The words weren't directed specifically at Elena, but they represented public recognition that healing was possible when people chose growth over grievance. The private conversation that followed graduation was more meaningful than any public ceremony. Sophia presented Elena with a photo album documenting 5 years of achievements, friendships, and growth that had occurred during maternal absence. But instead of weaponizing the images to highlight abandonment, Sophia offered them as bridge to understanding who she'd become without negating what they might become together. "I want you to know who I am now," Sophia explained, "not just remember who I was when you left. If we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be based on who we actually are, not who we used to be, or who we wish we could have been." The maturity in Sophia's approach impressed Elena while challenging her to abandon fantasy of resuming interrupted motherhood in favor of building new relationship with the young woman her daughter had become. Elena's response was equally mature. "I can't give you back the years I missed, and I can't pretend that my reasons for staying deployed were all noble, but I can promise you that every decision I make from now on will consider how it affects you, even when you're at college, even when you're building your own family." The promise was specific, rather than general acknowledging past failures while committing to future consideration rather than control. Their goodbye at the airport when Sophia left for Colombia was emotional but hopeful. Elena's tears were a mixture of pride, regret, and determination to prove that redemption was possible through daily choice rather than dramatic gesture. "I love you, Mom," Sophia said, using the maternal title she'd avoided for months. "I'm proud of your service, and I'm learning to be proud of who we're becoming as a family." The reconciliation wasn't complete. Trust would require years to rebuild, but it was genuine. Elena had learned that being a mother meant more than financial support and good intentions. It required presence, accountability, and willingness to prioritize relationship over career when circumstances demanded choice. As Elena drove home from the airport, she understood that her greatest military victory hadn't occurred overseas, but in Rosa's living room, where she'd finally learned to serve her family with the same dedication she'd once reserved for her country. Elena's transformation from absent military parent to present civilian mother became a model for veteran families struggling with reintegration challenges that extended beyond individual adjustment to encompass family healing and relationship reconstruction. Her story influenced military family support programs and civilian therapy approaches that recognized deployment trauma affected entire family systems rather than individual service members. The immediate consequences were transformative for all 3 women involved. Elena's work at the VA hospital specialized in family reintegration therapy, using her personal experience to help other veterans navigate civilian transition while maintaining family relationships. Her professional development from patient to practitioner demonstrated that trauma could become qualification for helping others rather than permanent disability. Sophia's college experience was enriched by her complex family background, which provided unique perspective on military service, family sacrifice, and personal resilience that influenced her studies in social work and her eventual career helping military families. Her undergraduate thesis on deployment impact on military children became required reading in several military family therapy programs. Rosa's role evolved from emergency caregiver to family wisdom keeper. Her experience raising Sophia during Elena's absence, making her valuable resource for other grandparents managing similar circumstances. Her participation in military family support groups helped other elderly relatives understand their crucial role in maintaining family stability during extended deployments. The broader impact extended beyond their family to influence military policies regarding deployment length and family support services. Elena's testimony before congressional committees on military family issues helped shape legislation requiring enhanced family impact assessments before deployment extensions, particularly for single parents and families with special circumstances. The therapeutic model developed through Elena and Sophia's reconciliation process became template for family healing programs at multiple VA medical centers. Their willingness to participate in research studies helped therapists understand effective approaches to rebuilding trust, communication, and connection after extended separation caused by military service. Educational institutions began incorporating military family dynamics into social work and psychology curricula, recognizing that traditional family therapy models were inadequate for addressing deployment-related trauma and reintegration challenges. Elena's experience provided case study material that helped train future therapists working with military families. The long-term legacy was measured in relationships rather than achievements. Elena and Sophia's bond strengthened over time, with college breaks becoming opportunities for deepening connection rather than awkward visits. Their annual tradition of volunteering together at veteran family events created shared purpose that honored military service while prioritizing family relationships. Sophia's eventual marriage included Elena as full participant in wedding planning and celebration, demonstrating complete reconciliation and trust rebuilding. Her children grew up understanding their grandmother's military service as part of family history, rather than source of abandonment, suggesting that healing could extend across generations when properly nurtured. The universal message resonated across military and civilian communities. Family relationships damaged by service separation could be rebuilt when veterans chose accountability over defensiveness, when family members chose healing over resentment, and when communities provided support rather than judgment for families navigating the complex intersection of military duty and domestic responsibility.